Welcome to Stoic Vivu, where we make ancient wisdom work for modern life. I'm here to share the practical philosophy that helped emperors, slaves, and everyone in between build unshakable mental strength. And today we're focusing on something that most people get completely backwards. When you think about getting mentally stronger, what comes to mind? Maybe hitting the gym harder, reading more motivational quotes, or watching inspiring videos. But here's what the ancient Stoics discovered over 2,000 years ago, and what modern psychology is just catching up to. Real mental strength doesn't come from what you add to your life. It comes from the daily habits you practice consistently, especially the ones that seem small and ordinary. Think about this for a moment. You wake up every morning with the same mind, the same emotions, and the same tendency to react to whatever life throws at you. The question isn't whether challenges will come. The question is whether you'll be ready for them. And that readiness doesn't happen by accident or through occasional bursts of motivation. It happens through specific daily practices that the Stoics called disciplines. Marcus Aurelius ruled the Roman Empire, one of the most stressful jobs in human history. Seneca managed enormous wealth while navigating deadly political intrigue. Epictetus overcame slavery and physical disability to become one of history's greatest teachers. What did they all have in common? They didn't rely on perfect circumstances or endless motivation. They developed daily habits that made them mentally unbreakable. Today, you're going to learn the 7 specific habits that transformed ordinary Romans into philosophical legends, and more importantly, how to apply them to your modern American life. These aren't complicated meditation retreats or expensive therapy programs. They're simple daily practices that you can start implementing tomorrow morning. Here's what makes these habits different from everything else you've tried. First, they focus on what you actually control rather than what you hope will happen. Second, they build mental strength through small daily actions rather than dramatic lifestyle changes. And third, they work whether you're dealing with traffic jams in Los Angeles, workplace drama in Chicago, or family stress in suburban anywhere. Each habit we'll explore today builds on the previous one, creating a complete system for mental strength that becomes stronger over time. We'll start with how you begin each day, then move through managing your emotional reactions, staying calm under pressure, maintaining learning mindset, taking control of your life, committing to excellence, and finally transforming your worried thoughts into productive mental energy. The ancient Stoics proved that mental strength isn't about having a perfect life or never facing difficulties. It's about having the daily practices that prepare you for whatever comes next. These 7 habits will give you that preparation, and by the end of this video, you'll have a clear roadmap for building the kind of mental toughness that serves you in every area of life. Let's start with the foundation that makes everything else possible. Habit 1. Wake up ready to win every morning. Your alarm goes off at 6:30 a.m. on a Tuesday morning in downtown Chicago. The apartment is cold, your bed is warm, and you have that split second where your entire day hangs in the balance. You can hit snooze and steal 15 more minutes of comfort, or you can swing your feet to the floor and take control of the next 16 hours. What you choose in that moment doesn't just determine whether you're late for work. It determines whether you're the kind of person who conquers the day or lets the day conquer you. This exact scenario played out every morning for Marcus Aurelius, the most powerful man in the ancient world. Picture this. Even the Roman emperor, with unlimited resources and servants at his command, struggled to get out of bed. In his private journal, which we now call Meditations, he wrote down the conversation he had with himself every single morning. He would think, "But it's so warm under the covers." And then he would remind himself, "Is this what you were put here to do? To huddle under blankets and be comfortable?" Marcus understood something that most people miss completely. The morning battle isn't really about sleep or comfort. It's about identity. Every time you choose the easy option when the alarm sounds, you're casting a vote for the kind of person you are. Every time you choose purpose over comfort, you're building the mental muscle that will serve you in every challenge you face that day. Here's why this matters more than you might realize. Your morning routine isn't just about productivity or getting things done. It's about establishing psychological dominance over your own impulses. When you prove to yourself that you can override your brain's desire for comfort in the first 60 seconds of consciousness, you set up a pattern of self-trust that carries through every decision you make for the rest of the day. Think about it this way. If you can't control the moment you wake up, how can you expect to control your reaction when your boss criticizes your presentation? If you can't manage your impulse to stay comfortable in bed, how will you manage your impulse to scroll social media when you should be working on important projects? The morning victory creates momentum for every other victory. Marcus Aurelius discovered that we're all put here with what he called a purpose or nature. For him, that meant ruling justly and serving the common good. For you, it might mean being an excellent parent, building a business, or making a positive impact in your community. But regardless of your specific purpose, it requires you to act against your immediate comfort and toward your long-term values. The bed test is where this muscle gets built. Let me give you the specific framework that Marcus used, translated for your modern life. When your alarm sounds, instead of thinking about how tired you feel or how much you want to sleep, ask yourself 3 questions that the emperor asked himself every morning. First, what important work is waiting for me today? This connects your waking up to something larger than your immediate comfort. Second, how will I serve others today? This reminds you that your life has meaning beyond your personal convenience. Third, what kind of person do I want to prove myself to be in the next 16 hours? This frames getting up as an act of character building rather than just a daily routine. The practical application looks like this. Tonight, before you go to bed, identify one specific task that matters to you, something that moves your life forward in a meaningful way. It could be exercising, working on a personal project, spending quality time with family, or learning something new. Write it down and put it where you'll see it first thing in the morning. When your alarm sounds, before your brain can start negotiating for more sleep, remind yourself that this task is waiting for you and that completing it is how you demonstrate respect for your own potential. Here's the key insight that changes everything. The Stoics taught that we suffer more in imagination than in reality. The anticipation of getting up is almost always worse than actually getting up. Your brain will tell you that you're too tired, that you need more rest, that you can start tomorrow. But notice what happens when you actually stand up and start moving. Within minutes, your body adapts, your energy increases, and you remember why you wanted to get up in the first place. Marcus Aurelius put it perfectly when he wrote, "You were born to work together with others." He understood that staying in bed when you have important work to do isn't just laziness. It's a betrayal of your responsibility to contribute something valuable to the world. When you get up with purpose instead of reluctance, you're not just starting your day. You're honoring the gifts you've been given and the opportunities in front of you. The morning ritual becomes a daily practice of choosing your values over your feelings, your long-term identity over your short-term comfort, and your potential over your immediate impulses. This is how ordinary people develop the mental strength that serves them in extraordinary ways. Every morning you get to vote for who you are. Make sure your vote counts. With this foundation of morning discipline established, we can now explore how to maintain that mental strength when life inevitably tests your emotional composure throughout the day. Habit 2. Stop letting small things ruin your day. You're driving to work on Interstate 405 in Los Angeles, and traffic comes to a complete standstill. What should have been a 20-minute commute is now stretching into an hour, and you can feel your blood pressure rising. Your mind starts spinning. This is ridiculous. Why can't they fix these roads? Now I'm going to be late for my meeting. My whole day is ruined. By the time you finally reach your office, you're frustrated, stressed, and ready to snap at the first person who asks you a simple question. Sound familiar? You've just experienced what destroys more peace of mind than any major life crisis ever could. It wasn't a job loss, a health scare, or a relationship ending. It was traffic. A completely ordinary, completely predictable part of modern life managed to hijack your emotional state and set a negative tone that could last for hours. Marcus Aurelius faced this exact same challenge, though his version involved political betrayals, military campaigns, and plagues instead of traffic jams. As the Roman emperor, he dealt with senators who lied to him, generals who disappointed him, and citizens who criticized him despite his best efforts to serve them well. He had more legitimate reasons to complain than perhaps anyone in history. Yet when scholars studied his private journal, Meditations, they discovered something remarkable. In over 200 pages of his most personal thoughts, he never complains about any of it. Not once. This wasn't because Marcus had an easy life or because he was naturally calm. He was dealing with a plague that killed millions, wars on multiple fronts, and constant political pressure. He chose not to complain because he understood something that transforms how you experience every single day. He wrote, "We should never be overheard complaining, not even to ourselves." Here's the breakthrough insight that Marcus discovered. Complaining doesn't just express your frustration about a situation. It actually creates more frustration and makes the situation feel worse than it really is. When you verbalize your annoyance about traffic, you're not just reporting what happened. You're programming your brain to focus on everything that's wrong, which means you'll notice more problems and feel more stressed about all of them. Think about how this works in your daily experience. You stub your toe getting out of bed, and instead of just feeling the momentary pain, you say, "Great, now my whole morning is off to a terrible start." That single comment doesn't just describe your toe. It creates an expectation that everything else will go wrong too. Then, when your coffee tastes slightly off or you hit one red light, your brain says, "See, I told you this would be a bad day." You've turned a minor physical discomfort into a day-long emotional pattern. Marcus realized that most of our suffering comes not from what happens to us, but from the stories we tell ourselves about what happens to us. When you're stuck in traffic, the actual problem is simple. You're moving slower than you planned. That's it. Everything else, the frustration, the anger, the sense that your day is ruined, comes from the narrative you add on top of the basic facts. Here's the practical framework Marcus used that you can apply starting today. When something small goes wrong, before you react, ask yourself 2 questions that he asked himself constantly. First, is this worth my peace of mind? Most of the time, the honest answer is no. Being 5 minutes late is not worth feeling agitated for the next 3 hours. Second, what can I actually control about this situation right now? In traffic, you can control your music choice, your breathing, or whether you use the time to think through a problem you're working on. You cannot control the traffic itself. The Stoics taught a powerful principle called the dichotomy of control, which means recognizing the difference between what's up to you and what's not up to you. Traffic patterns, other people's driving habits, and construction delays. These are not up to you. Your emotional response, your focus during the delay, and what you choose to think about while you wait, these are completely up to you. But here's where most people get this wrong. They think not complaining means pretending everything is fine or suppressing their emotions. That's not what Marcus practiced. He acknowledged problems clearly and dealt with them effectively. The difference is that he didn't waste emotional energy on things he couldn't change, which meant he had more energy available for things he could change. Let me show you how this looks in practice. You walk into your office and discover that someone has eaten your lunch from the refrigerator. The old pattern would be to spend 15 minutes complaining to coworkers about how inconsiderate people are, working yourself into increasing levels of annoyance. The Marcus Aurelius approach is to notice that you're hungry, recognize that being upset won't bring your lunch back, and simply solve the problem by ordering something else or asking a colleague for restaurant recommendations. The transformation happens when you realize that complaining is actually a choice you're making, not an automatic response you can't control. Every time you catch yourself about to verbalize frustration about something small, you can pause and ask, will saying this make the situation better or just make me feel worse? Most of the time, a complaint just amplifies the negative emotions without improving anything. Marcus put it this way: how much trouble he avoids who does not look to see what his neighbor says or does, but only to what he does himself. When you stop focusing on everything that's wrong with your circumstances and start focusing on how you're choosing to respond to your circumstances, you reclaim the mental energy that the complaint was draining away. This doesn't mean you become passive or accept genuinely problematic situations. It means you direct your energy toward productive action rather than emotional reaction. Instead of complaining about traffic, you might research alternate routes or adjust your schedule. Instead of complaining about a difficult coworker, you might have a direct conversation or document interactions professionally. The goal isn't to never feel frustrated. The goal is to not let small frustrations compound into large emotional disruptions that affect everything else you're trying to accomplish that day. When you master this habit, you discover that most days are actually much better than you thought. You were just focusing on the wrong parts. This foundation of emotional regulation naturally leads us to an even more powerful skill that the Stoics considered essential for mental clarity. Habit 3. Stay calm in any situation. You're sitting in a conference room in downtown Manhattan, and your boss just criticized your quarterly report in front of the entire team. Your face feels hot, your heart is racing, and every instinct is telling you to defend yourself or explain why the numbers aren't your fault. In this moment, you have a choice that will determine not just how the rest of this meeting goes, but how you'll be perceived by everyone in that room for months to come. You can react from emotion, or you can respond from a place of calm clarity that most people never learn to access. This scenario would have been instantly recognizable to Marcus Aurelius, though his version involved Senate meetings where political enemies attacked his policies and questioned his leadership in front of the most powerful people in Rome. The stakes were literally life and death, since Roman politics could end with exile or execution. Yet Marcus discovered something that became one of his most valuable mental tools. And when you understand it, you'll have a superpower that works in any stressful situation you'll ever face. Here's what Marcus wrote in his private journal. Remember that events and things are not asking to be judged by you. You don't have to have an opinion about this. At first glance, this might seem like philosophical abstraction, but it's actually the most practical advice for staying calm that you'll ever receive. Let me show you exactly how this works and why it changes everything. When your boss criticizes your work, what's actually happening? Someone is making sounds with their mouth that create vibrations in the air. Those vibrations reach your ears, your brain interprets them as words, and then something crucial happens that most people never notice. Your mind immediately adds a layer of interpretation on top of those basic facts. You don't just hear the words. You decide that the words mean you're incompetent, that your job is in danger, that you're being humiliated, or that the criticism is unfair. But here's the breakthrough insight that Marcus discovered. None of those interpretations is actually part of what happened. They're opinions you're adding to the basic facts. The criticism exists. Your emotional reaction to the criticism is something you're creating through the meaning you assign to it. And here's the key. You have complete control over that meaning-making process. Marcus called this the discipline of assent, which means you get to choose what you agree with in your own mind. When someone criticizes you, you can agree with the thought that this means you're terrible at your job, or you can simply observe that someone expressed dissatisfaction with your work. When you're stuck in traffic, you can agree with the thought that this ruins your whole day, or you can observe that cars are moving slower than usual. The facts remain the same, but your emotional experience changes completely. Let me walk you through how this looks in practice because the technique is simpler than you might expect. When you find yourself getting emotionally activated by a situation, pause and ask yourself this question that Marcus asked constantly. What actually happened here? Without any interpretation. Strip away all the meaning, all the implications, all the stories about what it means for your future or your reputation. Just describe the basic, observable facts like you're a scientist taking notes. So when your boss criticizes your report, the facts are: a person made specific statements about certain aspects of your work. That's it. Everything else, whether the criticism is fair, whether it means you're in trouble, whether other people agree with it, whether you should feel embarrassed, all of that is interpretation you're adding. And since you're the one adding it, you can choose not to add it. This doesn't mean you ignore feedback or pretend criticism doesn't matter. It means you separate the useful information from the emotional drama. Maybe your boss identified genuine areas for improvement. Maybe they have a point about your presentation style or your data analysis. You can acknowledge that information and use it to get better without also accepting the story that this makes you a failure or that your career is over. Marcus practiced this discipline constantly because he understood that most of our emotional suffering comes not from what happens to us, but from the judgments we make about what happens to us. A colleague doesn't return your email quickly. That's a fact. The judgment that they're being disrespectful or that they don't value your time is something you're adding. Your teenager rolls their eyes when you give them advice. That's a behavior you observed. The interpretation that they don't respect you or that you're failing as a parent is your addition to the basic facts. Here's where this becomes a practical superpower. When you stop automatically adding dramatic interpretations to neutral events, you create space for much more effective responses. Instead of getting defensive when criticized, you can ask clarifying questions that help you understand the feedback better. Instead of feeling angry when someone is late, you can use the extra time productively or simply enjoy a few quiet moments. Instead of feeling anxious about an uncertain outcome, you can focus your energy on the aspects of the situation you actually control. The ancient Stoics had a phrase for this: "It's not what happens to you, but how you react to it that matters." But they weren't talking about positive thinking or pretending everything is fine. They were talking about recognizing that your reaction is always a choice, even when it doesn't feel like one. The choice happens in that split second when you decide what meaning to assign to whatever just occurred. Marcus put this perfectly when he wrote, "You have power over your mind, not outside events. Realize this, and you will find strength." The strength he's referring to isn't physical toughness. It's the mental clarity that comes from not being at the mercy of your immediate emotional reactions to every unexpected thing that happens during your day. Practice this technique starting with small situations. When someone cuts you off in traffic, when your coffee order is wrong, when technology doesn't work the way you expect. Notice the difference between what actually happened and the story you tell yourself about what happened. The more you practice separating facts from interpretations in low-stakes situations, the more natural it becomes when facing genuinely challenging circumstances. This ability to maintain an objective perspective under pressure creates the perfect foundation for developing another crucial mental habit that distinguishes truly successful people from everyone else. Habit 4. Act like you know nothing. You're in a team meeting at your company in Seattle, and a younger colleague starts explaining a new software platform that could improve your department's efficiency. Your first instinct is to mentally categorize this as similar to systems you've used before, maybe even to interrupt with your own experience about why these implementations usually fail. After all, you've been in this industry for 15 years. You've seen these trends come and go. You know how these things work. But here's what you don't realize. That knowledge, that certainty, that experience you're so proud of might be the very thing preventing you from learning something that could transform your career. This exact scenario played out constantly in ancient Rome at the school of Epictetus, one of history's greatest teachers. Students would arrive from across the Roman Empire, the brightest minds from the most prestigious families, already accomplished in rhetoric, mathematics, and philosophy. They came expecting to debate and demonstrate their intelligence. Instead, Epictetus would tell them something that initially frustrated many of them. It is impossible to learn that which you think you already know. At first, this sounds like a clever philosophical riddle, but Epictetus was pointing to something much more practical and powerful. He understood that the human mind has a built-in mechanism that stops learning the moment it believes it has sufficient knowledge about something. When you think you already understand a concept, a process, or a situation, your brain literally stops paying attention to new information that might contradict or expand your existing understanding. Think about how this shows up in your daily life. When someone starts explaining something you believe you already know, what happens? Your attention drifts. You start thinking about what you'll say next instead of listening to what they're actually saying. You look for confirmation of what you already believe rather than genuinely considering whether they might have insights you're missing. You've shifted from learning mode to judgment mode, and in judgment mode, no new learning can occur. Epictetus called this the disease of the know-it-all, and he considered it the greatest obstacle to wisdom that any person could face. Here's why this matters more than you might realize. In our rapidly changing world, the half-life of knowledge is shrinking dramatically. What you learned about your industry 5 years ago might be partially obsolete today. The strategies that made you successful in the past might be exactly what prevents you from succeeding in the future. But if you approach new information with the assumption that you already know what you need to know, you'll miss the updates that could keep you relevant and competitive. Marcus Aurelius, despite being the most powerful person in his world, was a student of Epictetus's teachings. He wrote in his personal journal, "Every new beginning comes from some other beginning's end." He understood that to grow into who he needed to become as a leader, he had to be willing to let go of who he thought he already was. This required what the Stoics called intellectual humility, which is the recognition that your current understanding is always incomplete and potentially inaccurate. Here's the practical framework that Epictetus taught his students, which you can apply starting today. When you encounter new information, especially in areas where you consider yourself knowledgeable, approach it with what he called beginner's mind. This means consciously setting aside what you think you know and engaging with the information as if you're hearing about this topic for the first time. Let me show you exactly how this works. When that colleague starts explaining the new software platform, instead of thinking, "I already know about project management tools," ask yourself, "What might I learn here that I don't currently understand?" Instead of looking for reasons why this won't work based on your past experience, look for ways this might be different from what you've encountered before. Instead of preparing your counterarguments, focus on understanding their perspective completely before you evaluate it. This doesn't mean you abandon your experience or pretend your knowledge has no value. Your experience provides important context for evaluating new information. But experience becomes a liability when it prevents you from updating your understanding based on new evidence. The goal is to use your background as a foundation for learning more, not as a wall that keeps new ideas out. Epictetus discovered that the smartest people often struggle with this more than anyone else because they have more invested in being right. If you've built your professional identity around being the expert, the person who has the answers, then admitting you might be wrong or incomplete in your understanding feels like a threat to your entire sense of self. But here's what Epictetus understood that most people miss. True expertise isn't knowing everything. True expertise is knowing how to learn efficiently and update your understanding when better information becomes available. The most successful people in any field share this characteristic. They approach new information with curiosity rather than defensiveness. They ask questions that reveal the limits of their current understanding. They seek out perspectives that challenge their assumptions. They treat every conversation as a potential learning opportunity rather than a chance to prove how much they already know. Consider how this applies to your relationships as well. When your spouse tries to explain why something upset them, do you listen with a beginner's mind? Or do you assume you already understand their emotional patterns? When your teenage child shares their perspective on a social issue, do you engage with curiosity about how their generation sees the world? Or do you immediately contrast it with what you believed at their age? The quality of your relationships often depends on your willingness to learn new things about people you think you already know completely. Here's the daily practice that transforms this from an interesting idea into a life-changing habit. Each morning, identify one area where you consider yourself knowledgeable and commit to approaching that topic today as if you're a beginner. If you're experienced in sales, listen to a junior colleague's approach with genuine curiosity. If you're confident about your parenting philosophy, ask your children what they think you could do differently. If you're certain about your political views, seek out thoughtful people who disagree with you and try to understand their reasoning. The goal isn't to become wishy-washy or to doubt everything you believe. The goal is to remain intellectually flexible enough to grow throughout your entire life. As Epictetus put it, wealth consists in not having great possessions, but in having few wants. The same principle applies to knowledge. Intellectual wealth consists not in having all the answers, but in maintaining the capacity to ask better questions. This foundation of intellectual humility creates the perfect conditions for developing the most important form of control any person can master. Habit 5. Take control of your life in 3 steps. You're scrolling through social media at 11 p.m. on a Wednesday night, watching other people's vacation photos and career updates, when you suddenly realize you've been mindlessly swiping for 2 hours. Your phone battery is dying, you haven't finished the work project that's due tomorrow, and you feel that familiar mixture of anxiety and frustration that comes from knowing you're not living up to your own potential. In this moment, you might think the problem is time management or willpower, but the real issue runs much deeper. You've given control of your life to forces outside yourself, and until you take that control back, nothing else will fundamentally change. This situation would have been immediately recognizable to Seneca, one of Rome's most successful philosophers and advisors to emperors. Despite managing enormous wealth and navigating deadly political intrigue, Seneca discovered something that most people never learn. True control doesn't come from controlling your circumstances. It comes from mastering yourself first. He wrote, "No one is fit to rule who is not first master of themselves." And this wasn't abstract philosophy. It was practical wisdom born from watching countless powerful people destroy themselves because they never learned the difference between external power and internal command. The reason most people feel out of control in their lives isn't because they lack opportunities or resources. It's because they've never learned to distinguish between what they can actually control and what they cannot control, and they waste enormous amounts of mental energy trying to manage things that are fundamentally outside their influence. This creates a constant state of frustration and anxiety that makes effective action nearly impossible. Here's the framework that Seneca developed, which transforms how you approach every challenge in your life. The Stoics called this the discipline of control, and it consists of 3 steps that you can apply to any situation that's causing you stress or confusion. These steps seem simple at first, but they require daily practice to master, and when you do master them, they give you a level of personal effectiveness that most people never experience. Step 1 is recognition, which means clearly identifying what aspects of any situation are actually within your control and what aspects are not. This sounds obvious, but most people get this wrong constantly. When you're worried about a job interview, for example, you cannot control whether the interviewer likes you, whether other candidates are more qualified, or whether the company decides to hire anyone at all. You can control how thoroughly you prepare, how professionally you present yourself, and how clearly you communicate your qualifications. The moment you start trying to control the uncontrollable, you're setting yourself up for frustration and ineffective action. Here's how to practice this recognition in your daily life. When you notice yourself feeling anxious or frustrated about something, pause and ask yourself this question that Seneca asked constantly: what part of this situation is actually up to me? Write down your answer and be brutally honest about separating what you influence from what you don't influence. Most people discover that they've been unconsciously trying to control things like other people's opinions, market conditions, their boss's mood, or their teenagers' choices, while neglecting the things they do control, like their own preparation, effort, and responses. Step 2 is acceptance, which means genuinely letting go of your attachment to outcomes you cannot control. This is where most people struggle because they confuse acceptance with passivity. Stoic acceptance isn't about giving up or not caring about results. It's about directing your emotional energy toward your actions rather than toward outcomes that depend on factors beyond your influence. When you accept that you cannot control whether you get the promotion, you can invest all your energy in doing the best work possible instead of worrying about office politics or comparing yourself to colleagues. The practical application of acceptance looks like this. After you've identified what you cannot control in a situation, practice what Seneca called negative visualization. Imagine the outcome you don't want actually happening and ask yourself, if this doesn't go the way I hope, what will I do next? This isn't pessimism. It's preparation. When you've mentally prepared for various outcomes, you're less emotionally attached to any specific result, which means you can act more effectively in the present moment. Step 3 is decisive action, which means putting all your available energy into the aspects of the situation you actually control. This is where the real power of Stoic philosophy becomes clear. When you stop wasting mental energy on uncontrollable outcomes, you have dramatically more focus and motivation available for the actions that actually matter. Instead of spending your evening worrying about whether your presentation will be well received, you spend that time making your presentation as good as possible. Seneca discovered that most people reverse this process. They spend enormous amounts of energy trying to control outcomes while taking minimal action on the things they can control. They worry about whether people will like them instead of focusing on being genuinely likable. They stress about whether their business will succeed instead of concentrating on providing excellent service to customers. They anxiously monitor their teenagers' grades instead of creating a supportive home environment that encourages learning. Here's how these 3 steps work together in practice. Let's say you're concerned about your financial future. Step 1, recognition, means acknowledging that you cannot control market performance, your company's profitability, or economic conditions, but you can control your spending habits, your skill development, and your saving rate. Step 2, acceptance, means letting go of your anxiety about factors like inflation or job market trends, while remaining committed to building financial security through your own actions. Step 3, decisive action, means creating a specific budget, investing in your professional development, and building an emergency fund instead of just worrying about money. The transformation happens when you realize that this approach actually gives you more influence over your outcomes, not less. When you focus exclusively on what you control, you become much more effective at influencing the results you want. Seneca put it this way: every new beginning comes from some other beginning's end. Taking control of your life requires ending your old pattern of trying to control everything and beginning the disciplined practice of controlling yourself. This foundation of self-mastery naturally leads to a crucial understanding about what true excellence actually means and how to achieve it consistently. Habit 6. Never settle for less than your best. You're working on a quarterly report at your desk in Phoenix, and it's 4:30 p.m. on a Friday afternoon. The document is due Monday morning, and what you've written so far is adequate. It covers all the required information, follows the proper format, and will definitely satisfy your manager's expectations. You could submit it as is and spend your weekend relaxing, or you could stay another hour to make it genuinely excellent. In this moment, you're facing a choice that reveals more about your character than any personality test ever could. The question isn't whether anyone will notice the difference. The question is whether you will live with the knowledge that you chose convenience over excellence when excellence was within your reach. This exact scenario played out in a naval office decades ago when a young Jimmy Carter was interviewing for a position under Admiral Hyman Rickover, one of the most demanding leaders in military history. After Carter had discussed his grades, his test scores, and his accomplishments, Rickover looked at him with a question that would haunt him for the rest of his life. "Did you always do your best?" Carter, being honest, admitted that he had not always given his maximum effort. Rickover's response was devastating in its simplicity. He asked, "Why not?" Then he stood up and left the room, ending the interview. That question, "Why not?" became the driving force behind Carter's approach to everything he did afterward. It wasn't about perfectionism or never making mistakes. It was about the recognition that doing less than your best is a choice you make, and every time you make that choice, you're deciding what kind of person you want to be. Marcus Aurelius understood this principle deeply when he wrote in his private journal, "In the morning when thou risest unwillingly, let this thought be present with thee. I am rising to the work of a human being." Here's what most people misunderstand about excellence. They think it's about being better than other people, achieving recognition, or reaching some external standard of success. But the Stoics understood that true excellence is about honoring the gifts you've been given by using them fully, regardless of whether anyone notices or rewards you for it. When you do less than your best, you're not just shortchanging your employer or disappointing others. You're wasting the potential that exists only in you and can never be recovered once the moment passes. Think about this principle in terms of simple daily activities. When you wash dishes, you can scrub them just enough to remove visible food particles, or you can clean them thoroughly enough that you'd be proud to serve a meal to someone you respect. When you send an email, you can write something that conveys the basic information, or you can craft something clear, helpful, and professional that reflects well on you and makes the recipient's job easier. When you exercise, you can go through the motions until you've satisfied the minimum time requirement, or you can push yourself to discover what your body is actually capable of. The difference isn't about the results you achieve. It's about the person you become through the process of consistently demanding excellence from yourself. Marcus Aurelius ruled the Roman Empire, the most complex organization in the ancient world, but he understood that external success means nothing if it's built on a foundation of internal mediocrity. He wrote, "Be like the rocky headland on which the waves constantly break. It stands firm, and round it the seething waters are laid to rest." Here's the practical framework that transforms this from an inspiring idea into a daily practice. Every time you begin a task, whether it's preparing a presentation or having a conversation with your spouse, ask yourself the question that Carter learned to ask: am I prepared to do my best here? If the answer is no, either change your approach or consciously choose not to do the task at all. Half-hearted effort often produces worse results than no effort because it wastes your time and energy while creating substandard outcomes. But here's where this gets psychologically complex. Doing your best doesn't mean spending infinite time on every task or being paralyzed by perfectionism. The Stoics understood that excellence is contextual. Your best effort on a casual email to a colleague looks different from your best effort on a presentation to your company's board of directors. The key is honestly assessing what the situation requires and then giving that level of effort completely, without holding back or cutting corners. Seneca explained this beautifully when he wrote, "Every new beginning comes from some other beginning's end." Each time you choose excellence over adequacy, You're ending the pattern of settling for less than your potential and beginning the habit of honoring your capabilities. This compound effect is what separates people who achieve extraordinary results from those who remain perpetually disappointed with their outcomes. The most profound insight about this habit is that excellence becomes easier with practice, not harder. When you consistently do your best work, you develop what psychologists call self-efficacy, which is confidence in your ability to handle challenges effectively. You stop doubting whether you can produce quality results because you have evidence from your own experience that you can be counted on to deliver when it matters. Consider how this applies to your relationships as well. When you have a conversation with your child, are you giving them your full attention? Or are you mentally planning your next task while they're talking? When you spend time with your spouse, are you genuinely present and engaged? Or are you going through the motions while thinking about work? The quality of your relationships is directly related to the quality of attention and effort you bring to them. Here's the daily practice that makes this habit automatic. Each evening, review your day and identify 3 specific instances where you chose your best effort over the minimum acceptable effort. Also identify 1 situation where you settled for less than your best, and plan how you'll handle similar situations differently tomorrow. This isn't about self-criticism. It's about building awareness of when you're honoring your potential and when you're wasting it. The goal isn't to be perfect or to exhaust yourself pursuing impossible standards. The goal is to live with the quiet confidence that comes from knowing you consistently give your best to whatever you're doing. As Marcus Aurelius wrote, "Waste no more time arguing what a good person should be. Be one." Excellence isn't something you achieve once. It's something you choose repeatedly, in small moments, when no one else is watching and no one else will know the difference except you. This commitment to excellence creates the perfect foundation for understanding how to direct your mental energy toward growth rather than self-destruction. Habit 7. Turn your worrying into your superpower. You're lying in bed at 2 a.m. in your apartment in Denver, and your mind is spinning through an elaborate scenario about what might happen if the presentation you're giving next week doesn't go well. You imagine your boss looking disappointed, your colleagues questioning your competence, and maybe even losing your job because of one bad meeting. Your heart is racing, you're wide awake, and you've spent the last hour creating an entire disaster movie in your head about an event that hasn't even happened yet. What you don't realize is that you're using one of your most powerful mental abilities, your imagination, to torture yourself instead of to solve problems and create opportunities. This pattern would have been instantly familiar to Seneca, who understood better than almost anyone how the human mind can become its own worst enemy. As one of Rome's wealthiest citizens and advisor to Emperor Nero, Seneca faced genuine life-or-death political pressures every day. One wrong move could mean exile or execution. Yet he discovered something that transformed how he approached uncertainty and challenge. He wrote, "We suffer more in imagination than in reality." And this insight became the foundation for one of the most practical mental skills you can ever develop. Here's what Seneca realized about the nature of worry. Your brain has evolved an incredible capacity for imagination, the ability to mentally simulate scenarios that haven't happened yet. This is actually one of humanity's greatest evolutionary advantages. It allows you to plan for challenges, prepare for opportunities, and solve problems before they become crises. But when this powerful capability gets hijacked by anxiety, it becomes a weapon you use against yourself instead of a tool you use to improve your life. Think about what happens when you worry. You're not just sitting quietly feeling nervous. Your mind is actively creating detailed, vivid scenarios about negative outcomes. You're essentially writing, directing, and starring in mental movies about everything that could go wrong. But notice something crucial about these worry scenarios. They almost always focus on problems without spending equal time on solutions. You imagine losing your job, but you don't imagine the steps you'd take to find a new one. You visualize your presentation going badly, but you don't visualize yourself preparing thoroughly and handling questions confidently. This is where the transformation happens. Seneca discovered that you can use the same mental process that creates worry to create preparation, problem solving, and opportunity recognition. The technique is called constructive visualization, and it works by redirecting your imaginative capacity toward productive outcomes instead of fearful ones. Instead of letting your mind randomly generate anxiety-inducing scenarios, you deliberately use your imagination to rehearse success and prepare for challenges. Here's the specific framework that Seneca developed, which you can start using tonight. When you catch your mind creating worried scenarios about future events, pause and ask yourself this question: how can I use this mental energy to actually prepare for what might happen? Then redirect your imagination toward 3 specific areas that will serve you regardless of what actually occurs. First, use your imagination to mentally rehearse the outcome you want. If you're worried about a presentation, instead of visualizing everything going wrong, spend that same mental energy visualizing yourself delivering your content clearly, handling questions confidently, and connecting with your audience effectively. This isn't wishful thinking. This is the same mental preparation technique that Olympic athletes use to improve their performance. When you repeatedly imagine yourself succeeding at something, you're actually creating neural pathways that make success more likely when the real situation occurs. Second, use your imaginative capacity to identify potential obstacles and develop specific responses to them. This is where Seneca's approach becomes brilliantly practical. Instead of just worrying that your presentation might not go well, imagine specific things that could go wrong and plan exactly how you'd handle each situation. What if the technology fails? What if someone asks a question you can't answer? What if you forget an important point? By mentally preparing responses to realistic challenges, you transform anxiety into confidence and readiness. Third, direct your imagination toward opportunity recognition. When you're worried about a job interview, instead of focusing on rejection, use that mental energy to imagine how this opportunity could lead to career growth, new relationships, or skills development. When you're anxious about a difficult conversation with your spouse, visualize how working through this challenge could strengthen your relationship and improve your communication patterns. Worry focuses on what you might lose. Constructive visualization focuses on what you might gain. The key insight that changes everything is recognizing that worry and preparation use the exact same mental process. Both involve imagining future scenarios in vivid detail. The only difference is the direction you point that imaginative capacity. Worry imagines problems without solutions. Preparation imagines challenges with responses. Anxiety creates fear about uncertainty. Constructive visualization creates confidence about your ability to handle whatever happens. Marcus Aurelius practiced this principle constantly, which is how he maintained composure while managing an empire during a plague, multiple wars, and constant political pressure. He wrote, "Confine yourself to the present," but he didn't mean you should never think about the future. He meant you should use your present mental energy productively rather than letting it spiral into uncontrolled anxiety about scenarios you cannot predict or prevent. Here's the daily practice that transforms this from an interesting concept into a life-changing habit. Each time you notice your mind creating worried scenarios, set a timer for 5 minutes and use that time for constructive visualization instead. Spend 2 minutes imagining the positive outcome you want, 2 minutes preparing responses to realistic challenges, and 1 minute identifying opportunities that could emerge from the situation. This gives your mind the same engaging mental activity that worry provides, but directs it toward outcomes that actually serve you. The transformation happens when you realize that your capacity for imagination is like any other tool. You can use a hammer to build something valuable, or you can use it to destroy something important. The choice is always yours. Seneca understood that mental strength doesn't come from eliminating worry entirely. It comes from channeling that mental energy toward preparation, problem solving, and opportunity creation instead of toward fear and anxiety. When you master this final habit, you complete the foundation of internal mastery that makes everything else in your life more effective and satisfying. Now, your new life of mental strength begins. You now possess the 7 daily habits that transformed ordinary Romans into philosophical legends. And more importantly, you understand exactly how to apply them to your modern American life. These aren't abstract concepts or wishful thinking. They're practical tools that work whether you're navigating downtown traffic in Chicago or managing workplace stress in Austin, whether you're raising teenagers in suburban Phoenix or building a business in bustling New York City. Think about what you've learned today. You've discovered how to wake up with purpose instead of reluctance, transforming those crucial first moments into daily victories that build momentum for everything else you do. You've learned to stop letting small frustrations compound into day-ruining emotional spirals, preserving your mental energy for what actually matters. You've gained the superpower of staying calm in any situation by separating facts from the dramatic interpretations your mind automatically adds to neutral events. You've embraced the intellectual humility that keeps you growing throughout your entire life, approaching familiar topics with the curiosity that reveals new insights and opportunities. You've mastered the 3-step process for taking real control of your life by focusing exclusively on what you can actually influence while releasing your attachment to outcomes beyond your power. You've committed to the excellence standard that honors your potential and builds unshakable confidence in your ability to deliver when it matters most. And finally, you've learned to transform your natural tendency to worry into a constructive tool for preparation, problem solving, and opportunity recognition. Your imagination is no longer a weapon you use against yourself. It's become your greatest asset for creating the future you want. Here's what makes this approach different from everything else you've tried. These 7 habits work together synergistically, each one reinforcing and strengthening the others. When you wake up with purpose, you're more likely to maintain composure when small things go wrong. When you stay intellectually humble, you make better decisions about what you can and cannot control. When you commit to excellence, you naturally redirect worried thoughts toward productive preparation. But understanding these habits intellectually isn't enough. The ancient Stoics knew that philosophy without practice is worthless. Real transformation happens when you choose one habit and commit to practicing it daily until it becomes automatic, then gradually incorporate the others into your routine. Remember, Marcus Aurelius didn't become mentally unbreakable overnight. Seneca didn't master self-command through a single insight. Epictetus didn't develop intellectual humility by reading about it once. Start with the habit that resonates most strongly with you right now. Maybe it's the morning routine that gives you control over your day's beginning. Or perhaps it's learning to stay calm under pressure by observing situations objectively. Choose one, practice it consistently for a week, and notice how it affects not just your stress levels, but your confidence, your relationships, and your effectiveness in everything you do. The goal isn't perfection. The goal is progress. Every time you choose purpose over comfort, objectivity over emotional reaction, or constructive visualization over anxious worry, you're becoming more like the person you're capable of being. The Stoics understood that character is built through countless small choices made when no one else is watching, and no one else will know the difference except you. If this video has given you even one insight that improves how you handle tomorrow's challenges, then we've honored the legacy of these ancient teachers who believed that philosophy should make your life better, not just more intellectually interesting. Subscribe to Stoic Vivu for more practical wisdom that transforms ancient insights into modern solutions. Like this video if these 7 habits will change how you approach your daily challenges. Share it with someone who needs these tools for building mental strength. And remember, you already have everything you need to start living with the calm confidence that comes from internal mastery. The only question is whether you'll choose to use it.